In a quiet diner, an old man observes waitress Emily offering a free meal to a ragged homeless man, initially dismissing her as naive. However, the man's faded military coat sparks a powerful memory in the narrator, forcing him to confront his own judgments. Emily's quiet act of dignity humbles the entire diner, and the man departs with a silent, respectful gesture. The narrator is left deeply reflective. But the next morning, an astonishing sight disrupts the town. 200 uniformed soldiers from every military branch stand silently outside the cafe. What profound revelation is about to connect this humble act of kindness to an unprecedented military gathering? If this true story moved you, please consider liking, subscribing to my channel, and sharing it. Help us remind others that decency matters and one person can make a difference. We'll continue sharing stories of honor, hope, and quiet heroes who deserve to be remembered. I was just an old man tucked away in the corner booth, the same one I sat in every morning, nursing a black coffee that had long since stopped tasting like anything. It was a quiet routine, the kind you slip into without even realizing it. Then the soft chime of the front doorbell broke the silence, and everything changed. A man shuffled in, more shadow than person really, wrapped in layers of tattered clothing and a silence that seemed to follow him like smoke. You could smell the cold on him. The wear and tear of 1,000 nights spent on concrete clung to his frame. Most of the cafe fell into that same quiet we wear when we don't want to get involved. But not Emily. Without a moment's hesitation, she moved from behind the counter, poured him a coffee, and brought him a hot plate of food. On the house. Not a single word of showmanship. No fuss, just kindness. Plain and true. I caught myself chuckling. Not from joy, not really. More like habit. What a waste of good food, I muttered to myself. That crusty old cynicism slipping out before I could stop it. Years of watching people disappoint each other had built that reflex. But the next morning, well, I'll never forget what I saw. I looked up from my coffee, expecting the same paper, the same faces. And I nearly dropped my mug. 200 soldiers stood outside the cafe, lined up with military precision, boots squared and polished. Uniforms clean, backs straight. The kind of formation you don't forget once you have seen it. All of them, every last one, had come for her. That kind of thing doesn't happen in our town. Not here. There's a rhythm to life in a place like this. It hums low and steady, like the wind through pine or the slow creak of the porch swing. We don't rush, we don't shout, and we sure as hell don't get surprised. It's the kind of town where Main Street still matters, where the store clerks know your dog's name, and folks wave whether they recognize you or not. Not much has changed in the last 40 years, truth be told. Maybe the color on the barbershop sign's been freshened up, or the price of mine has inched up at Eddie's old pump. But the bones of the place are the same. The cafe sits right in the center of it all, a low red shingled roof that burns almost copper in the morning sun, and a neon sign that hums louder than the traffic it overlooks. It's not some pit stop. It's a home base, a place people stay, sometimes too long, sometimes just long enough. And for those of us who've rooted deep, it isn't just a town anymore. It's memory made visible, etched into bricks, faded on old billboards, stitched into routines. The old bank still has those same worn brass handles on the front door. The movie theater still plays westerns every Friday night. Stubborn and proud. And the cafe, that's my place. Always has been. I gave 30 years to the United States Postal Service, delivered everything from love letters to tax refunds in rain, sleet, and snow. Knew the name behind every mailbox. But after a while, my back gave out, and my knees told me to sit down before I fell over. Retirement didn't fit right at first. I'd spent a lifetime bringing things to people. Letters, pensions, good news and bad. Now the only thing I deliver is myself to that corner booth. Same time every day. By 7:30 a.m., I'm already settled in. Black coffee, no sugar, no cream, same booth, same mug, if I'm lucky. The waitress knows, the regulars nod. My paper's already waiting, folded neatly on the table before I even sit. That's how things work here, quiet, familiar, dependable. Like an old pair of boots you can't bring yourself to throw out. In all these years, I've seen every kind of soul walk through those diner doors. Kids in Letterman jackets, truckers too tired to talk, salesmen with plastic grins. But nothing prepared me for what happened after Emily served that man breakfast. In a town where change moves slower than molasses in January, that single quiet act hit us like thunder on a clear blue morning. It started so small, just one girl, one forgotten man, one simple plate of food, and it was enough to shake something loose in all of us. Her name was Emily. She was probably 26, maybe 27. The kind of woman who carried goodness like other folks carry their keys. Always with her, never flaunted. She'd only been working at the cafe for about a year, but everyone already knew her name and, more importantly, her smile. Not the performative kind you slap on to chase bigger tips. Hers was soft, unforced, like the kind you get from someone who actually sees you, not just your order. And yet, for all her light, Emily kept her own story close. She didn't chatter about her past, no gossip, no complaints, no sob stories. She came in, tied on her apron, and took care of people. That's all. She remembered birthdays. She knew whether you wanted your eggs over easy or scrambled. She refilled your coffee before you even had to ask. She noticed things. She noticed people, which is probably why she was the only one who really saw him that morning. Not because he was hard to see, he wasn't, but because it was all too easy to overlook him, if that makes sense. He was thin, his body bent by time and hard luck. His age, somewhere past middle, but hard to peg exactly. A beard, white and tangled, uneven and untended. Shoulders sloped, eyes cast downward like he'd long since forgotten how to meet another's gaze. His coat, a dark green once meant to keep out cold, had lost that fight long ago. Its cuffs were frayed, buttons missing, and one sleeve clumsily repaired with bright red thread, like someone had tried to save it with whatever scrap they had left. He didn't ask for anything, didn't move, didn't speak, just sat outside the front door of the cafe, still as stone, not begging, not drawing attention, just there. Most people gave him a quick glance and then looked away, fast, like his presence was a mirror they didn't want to face. I did it too. I won't lie, I took a sip of my coffee and turned right back to my paper like the rest. But Emily didn't. And that made all the difference. She didn't read the headlines like the others. Emily never did. Without a single word, she stepped over to the counter, grabbed a clean plate, and began to load it with a quiet sense of purpose. She stacked the pancakes high, fluffy and golden like they'd just come off the griddle. Then came the scrambled eggs, soft and steaming, followed by hash browns that were crisp and brown just right at the edges. She added 4 thick-cut slices of bacon, cooked exactly the way I like mine, with just the right balance of crisp and chew. She slid the plate onto a tray, poured a glass of fresh orange juice, and walked out the front door like it was just another part of her routine, like she was heading out to refill ketchup bottles or wipe down tables. I watched from inside, through the large front window of the diner. She knelt slightly so she could look the man outside in the eyes, really look at him. I couldn't hear what she said. Her voice was low, maybe meant only for him. But whatever she said, it made him look up. And in that brief second, something passed between them. It wasn't pity, it wasn't charity, it was something quieter, deeper. Recognition, maybe, or respect. She gently set the plate down beside him on the bench, gave him a small, genuine smile, and then walked back inside like she hadn't done anything out of the ordinary. I leaned over and asked the busboy, "Did the manager okay that?" The kid just shrugged. Later, when I found myself telling the story, because of course I did, I remember saying that she didn't even ask the manager, she just did it, like it was the most normal, natural thing in the world. And maybe that's what gave it such weight. She didn't pause to ask for permission. She didn't stop to consider whether he was deserving. She saw a man who looked hungry and decided that was enough reason to act. Now, looking back, I think that one quiet act spoke louder than any speech I've heard in years. There's something I'll admit now that I didn't at the time. When I saw Emily place that plate in front of the homeless man, I didn't smile, I didn't nod in approval, or feel a warm glow of pride in her. No, I sipped my coffee and chuckled softly to myself, thinking, she's young, naive, that's all. I figured she was playing the hero for a day, chasing a little feel-good moment that would fade away and leave the diner out a plate and a few bucks worth of food. I thought, maybe she'll catch heat from the manager. Maybe the guy will hang around too long and drive off regulars. Maybe he'll come back tomorrow expecting more. In that moment, I didn't see a man. I saw a problem, a disruption, something that broke the smooth, comfortable rhythm of my morning. I don't like admitting that, but it's the truth. And there was something else too, something I didn't understand at the time. I didn't like the way he looked sitting out there in that tattered old coat. He wasn't doing anything. He wasn't dangerous, just silent, slouched, still. But his presence made me uneasy, not scared, just uncomfortable. Like his being there dulled the warmth inside, like he somehow stained the glass of the diner's front window just by sitting behind it. Funny how quickly we judge when we think we're above judgment. Then something pulled at my memory. That coat he wore, it was military green, worn and faded, sure, but unmistakably military issue. And near the shoulder, in the dim fold of fabric, I thought I saw where a patch might have once been stitched. A shadow of what used to be. My stomach twisted. My father had served in Normandy, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, the whole thing. He didn't talk about it much, but I'd grown up knowing what it took out of him. And I remembered one afternoon, must have been no more than 7 or 8 years old, I saw him hand a sandwich to a man sitting by the tracks, dressed in uniform. I asked him why. He said simply, "We never leave our own behind." That memory hit me like a freight train. Because there I was, decades later, looking at this man and judging him for being old, dirty, and alone. And all the while, he might have been wearing the last piece of a life that once held meaning. And there was Emily, young enough to be his granddaughter, seeing what I had somehow forgotten. She didn't see a disruption. She saw a human being. And when I glanced down at the coffee mug in my hands, I caught my reflection in the dark surface, caught a glimpse of the man I had become. And I didn't feel proud. He didn't stay long, maybe 15, 20 minutes tops. He sat quietly on the bench, hunched over the tray Emily had brought him. And he ate with this kind of slow, careful gratitude. Not like someone who was starving, but someone who hadn't tasted warmth in a long time. No mess, no hurry, no begging for more. Just precise, deliberate bites. As if each forkful mattered. As if each one was its own small moment. From where I sat inside, I could see him clearly through the window, framed by the soft glow of the morning sun. It reminded me of a painting, something old and full of shadow, but beautiful in its stillness. The steam rising from the eggs and hash browns curled gently in the light, softening the deep lines in his weathered face. For a moment, that harshness life had carved into him seemed to ease. He looked tired, not just in his body. He looked worn out, not just in body, but in spirit. Like he'd been carrying burdens too heavy for any of us to understand, weights invisible to the eye, but unmistakably real. Nobody in the diner said a word. The stillness was sudden and full. Forks hovered in midair, frozen before mouths. Newspapers crinkled, halfway folded. Coffee mugs sat untouched, steam slowly fading. We weren't watching with curiosity anymore, and certainly not with judgment. We were just watching, waiting. Though for what, none of us could say. Then he did something that etched itself into the back of my mind and has never left. He finished the last bite of his meal, wiped the corner of his mouth with a napkin, and even folded it neatly. He rose to his feet slowly. His knees cracked loudly as he stood. It was loud enough that we could hear it even through the thick pane of glass. He glanced down at his empty plate, then turned his gaze toward the diner's entrance. Toward us. With measured grace, he raised his right hand and gently placed it over his chest. It wasn't a salute. It was something more personal, more reverent, a gesture of respect. Then he gave a nod, small, intentional, and directed. Not to the crowd, not to the room as a whole, to her. Emily had just stepped out to check the sidewalk. Their eyes met. She saw him and smiled, not with pity, not with forced cheerfulness, but with something rare. Recognition. It was the kind of smile one seasoned professional gives another as they pass in silence, acknowledging the weight both carry without needing to speak. She didn't dramatize the moment. She didn't blink. She simply looked into his eyes and said softly, "Have a good morning, sir." He nodded once more, turned, and began to walk down the street. His steps were slow and even, his back straight, dignified. No one clapped, no one gasped, no one uttered a single syllable. But the quiet he left behind wasn't the awkward kind. It didn't make you want to shift in your seat. It wasn't cold. It was thick and dense, like fog, clinging to the scent of syrup and bacon, settling into the booths and cracks in the walls. It stayed there, that silence, filling the diner with a weight I'd only felt once or twice before in my entire life. I've lived long enough to learn there are different types of silence. The kind that comes from boredom, from apathy. And then there's the kind that comes when people realize, without needing to say it out loud, that something sacred has just happened. Something that mattered. Something too real, too raw, too true to interrupt. That morning we weren't just quiet, we were humbled by a stranger, by a young woman, by a small, silent act, and by the aching truth that not a single one of us had the right words to follow it with. The next morning began like any other, at least for a little while. I got to the diner earlier than usual, sometime around 6:45. Couldn't sleep much the night before. That man, his silence, his gesture, and the way Emily had met it so calmly, kept looping through my head like an old reel that refused to be rewound. I slid into my usual spot in the corner booth. The lights were still low, the air filled with the rich scent of coffee just brewed, and the jukebox in the back offered up a low hum of some hazy atmospheric song. Everything felt exactly as it should. Then, through the fogged-up front window, I saw them. A pair of black leather boots, laced to the shin, gleaming like glass from a mirror. Then another pair, then more. Within moments, I realized this wasn't just a couple of early risers out for breakfast. Outside, the sidewalk began to fill. Soldiers, dozens, then more, lined both sides of Main Street. They stood in solemn ranks, Marines in deep blue dress uniforms, Army Rangers in their rich green formals, Navy SEALs in desert tan, sharp and precise, Air Force officers with press coats and rows of ribbons shining beneath their collars, every branch, every kind, all standing shoulder to shoulder, not saying a word, no barking orders, no saluting, no formations being called out, just their presence, silent and still. There must have been 200 of them, maybe more, stretching down the block as far as I could see. Some held their caps under their arms, others had their hands folded behind their backs. All of them kept their eyes fixed on the diner, not as if it were a place to eat, but as if it were a place of worship. Inside, a fork slipped from someone's fingers and clinked onto a plate. The sound was oddly loud. A spoon dropped into a mug of coffee, echoing like a bell. Every head turned toward the window. And then he arrived. A sleek black SUV rolled to a stop at the end of the street. The door opened and a man stepped out. Tall, solid, with the unmistakable bearing of someone who had commanded others for years. The morning sunlight caught the glint of the stars on his shoulder. 3 of them. A lieutenant general, if memory serves. He walked toward the diner alone. No aides beside him, no press behind him. Just himself, walking slowly, each step deliberate. When he reached the entrance, he paused, removed his cap, and looked straight through the glass. Not at us, at Emily. She hadn't noticed him yet. She was behind the counter. She was just filling a fresh pot of coffee, humming softly like she always did. That quiet little melody was as much a part of the morning as the sun slipping through the windows. She didn't turn around until one of the busboys leaned in close and whispered her name. And I swear I'll never forget the way her expression changed. She lifted her head, probably expecting to be asked for another refill or told table 4 needed their check. But instead, what she saw was something entirely different. A wall of uniforms. Still, silent. Lined up like time had paused for them. Her hands froze mid-motion, fingers still curled around the glass pot. Her lips parted slightly, not even forming a word, just the start of a question that hadn't yet found its shape. And then, slowly, almost cautiously, she stepped out from behind the counter. Her movements were light, uncertain, as if she were walking into a dream she wasn't sure she wanted to wake from. She reached the front of the diner and opened the door. That's when the air shifted. A gust of cold air swept inside, not just cold from the outside world, but charged with something else. Something that buzzed faintly beneath the skin, like reverence, like weight, like history walking back into the room. Emily stood framed in the doorway, her apron still tied neatly at her waist, eyes flicking over the soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder. None of them moved, not a single word passed between them. Not yet. You could have heard a pin drop in that diner. No clinking of cutlery, no murmured conversations, just silence, so absolute it felt sacred. Even the creak of the front door sounded loud when it opened again, this time pushed gently by a man who walked in like he belonged in moments that mattered. He was tall and composed, silver just beginning to frost his temples. His chest bore the weight of metals, gleaming but not gaudy. He didn't stop to look around, he didn't pause. He moved with the surety of someone who had stepped into many rooms where history was being made. He walked straight up to the counter. Emily hadn't moved. She was still holding the coffee pot, her fingers trembling just enough to be noticed. The general reached into the inner pocket of his coat and pulled out a crisp envelope, sealed tight and pristine. He placed it on the counter, his hand reverent, as if laying down something holy. Then, standing tall, he brought his hand up in a perfect salute. Sharp, clean, unmistakable. It wasn't a performance. It wasn't for an audience. It was deliberate, earnest. The kind of salute that carried weight, and it was meant for her. Emily didn't move. Her eyes were wide, stunned, her breath shallow. The general held the salute a moment longer, then lowered his arm. His voice, when it came, was low and clear, each word like a stone placed carefully on sacred ground. "Miss Emily," he began, "this letter is to formally inform you that the man you served yesterday was Sergeant Lawrence Hawk Dawes, former squad leader, 3rd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment, presumed missing in action during a covert operation near Kandahar, Afghanistan, 15 years ago." You could feel the shift in the room then, a collective intake of breath. That name, many of us knew it, heard it whispered like a ghost story in military circles. Sergeant Dawes had disappeared into myth. His unit had returned, he hadn't. His story had quietly faded, like so many do. Until now, the general continued. "We searched for years. Eventually, he was declared lost, perhaps dead. But yesterday morning, after all this time, he made contact." He paused, letting that sink in. "It was your kindness," he said, looking directly at Emily, "your simple act of dignity that reached him. He told us it was the first time in years anyone had seen him, not as something broken or forgotten or in the way, but as a soldier, a man. You called him sir. You gave him a hot meal. You made him feel like he still mattered, that he still was someone." Emily's lips parted, but nothing came out. Her eyes glistened, but the tears didn't fall. She was too stunned for that, too overcome. The general rested his hand lightly on the envelope and slid it across the counter. "This is his official return notice. He wanted you to have it, said he wouldn't come in with us this morning, said the cafe was your place, that you gave him peace when nothing else did." Then he turned to look around the diner, at all of us sitting motionless with half-lifted forks and cooling plates. "That breakfast," he said, voice soft now, "meant more than food. It was the final signal he needed to come home." He gave one last nod to Emily. No fanfare, no speech, just a decorated general quietly turning and walking out of a corner diner, leaving behind a story none of us would ever forget. Emily stood there staring at the envelope like it was something fragile enough to crumble at a touch. And maybe it was. Maybe if she blinked too hard, the weight of it all would shatter. Because that envelope wasn't just a piece of paper. It was proof, undeniable and profound, that a single moment of quiet dignity, offered without expectation, could bring a man back from the long shadows. I didn't drink my coffee after the general left. It just sat there on the table, untouched and cooling, while the whole world outside the diner window kept moving, unaware of what had just happened inside. Cars rolled past, dogs barked. The familiar rhythm of small-town life quietly resumed, as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. But inside me, something had undeniably shifted. I kept my eyes fixed on the empty spot where the letter had been. Emily had taken it with both hands, still stunned, still silent. She never looked up, never turned her head, never saw me. And maybe that was just as well. I don't think I could have met her eyes, not after everything. I had laughed when she fed him. That's the truth I'll carry with me, like a stain I can't wash out. I sat in that booth, steeped in my own assumptions, certain I knew what people deserved and what they didn't. I'd convinced myself I understood dignity because once upon a time, I'd worn a uniform, because my father had bled in Normandy, because I'd worked decades in government service, believing that somehow granted me a clearer moral compass than most. But what Emily did that morning, without ceremony, without hesitation, without needing anyone's permission, cut deeper than any speech I've ever heard or medal I've ever watched being pinned. She didn't ask the man's name. She didn't need to know his backstory. She saw someone hungry and she fed him, saw someone adrift and offered him something solid. She gave a forgotten man his humanity back, reminded a soldier, one the rest of us had long since overlooked, who he really was. And I judged her for it. I sat there and judged her. Now I couldn't even find the words to apologize. So I did the only thing I could in that moment. I reached for my wallet, pulled out a crisp $50 bill, and slid it under my coffee mug. No note, no explanation. I didn't flag down the waitress or try to make a statement. It wasn't about the money, it could never be enough. But it was something, a gesture, a beginning. When I stepped out onto the sidewalk, the morning sun hit my face, and with it came a memory, one I hadn't thought of in years. My father standing by the kitchen sink, wiping black grease off his hands after fixing our old truck. I was a boy then, and I'd asked him why he had saluted a man in tattered clothes who walked by us on the street. My father had looked me straight in the eye and said, "Respect isn't earned by medals. It's earned by decency." I don't think I truly understood what he meant until that morning. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel worn down by the weight of years. I felt like a student again, like a quiet boy sitting in the back of the room, learning something profound from someone half my age. You wouldn't believe one breakfast could change the soul of a town. But it did. It started with a sign, just a small, hand-painted one, hung a little crooked in the diner's front window. Veterans welcome always. No fancy logos, no clever design, just 4 words that felt more like a promise than an advertisement. Emily didn't ask for the sign. She didn't ask for anything at all. After that morning with the soldiers, she simply went back to work. Same apron, same patient smile, same graceful way of topping off your coffee without interrupting your thoughts. But something had changed. All of us could feel it. Every morning, without fail, someone in the kitchen would quietly plate an extra breakfast and set it near the stove. Eggs, bacon, toast, no name written on the plate, no claim staked, but somehow that food always found its way into the hands of someone who needed it most. A man with a limp who spent his nights near the train tracks. A woman wrapped in a threadbare flannel with more layers than the coldest February required. A young boy who never quite had enough coins in his pocket. No questions, no attention drawn. The plate just moved. Quietly. Naturally. Emily never spoke of it, never pointed it out. She simply noticed and acted. That was her way, and the town noticed her. There were more nods on the sidewalk now, more doors held open. The corner store set out a small basket of gloves and scarves during the winter, free for anyone who needed them. The church brewed a second pot of coffee on Sundays just in case someone unfamiliar walked in. People who used to pass by the quiet man outside the post office now stopped to ask how he was doing. We started noticing folks we used to miss, the ones who fade into the background when you're too caught up in your own world. Those were the people we began to slow down for, to make room for, to finally see. The people we made space for didn't fix everything. They didn't turn this town into some storybook version of perfection, but they made it better, warmer, more thoughtful, more human. And now, on certain mornings, I sit in my usual booth, the one by the window, nursing a cup of coffee that's never quite hot enough. I look up at that faded sign in the glass and I smile. Not because anything miraculous happened, not because the town suddenly grew a heart overnight, but because somehow it remembered what it meant to care. All because one young woman didn't wait for a green light to do what her heart already knew was right. I've lived through many seasons of life, long enough to witness history shift in real time, to welcome people in and watch them disappear just as quietly, long enough to believe, rather smugly perhaps, that I had everything more or less figured out. I had grown content, no, complacent, in my routines, my judgments, in the hushed confidence that comes with surviving long enough to stop questioning the world. But that morning unraveled something in me. It took a whole army, real soldiers in real uniforms, to remind me of humility. But it took just one quiet girl to teach me what honor truly meant. Back then, I used to define honor in narrow terms: service, medals, scars you could point to. I thought respect was something you earned over years of sacrifice, through rank or rituals, through visible pain and public acts. I believed you had to prove yourself to be worthy of reverence. But I was wrong. Emily never asked that man who he was. She didn't need to. She didn't ask his name or what he'd done, or why he sat alone in the cold. She simply saw a human being, weathered, yes, but still deserving of dignity. And she offered it without hesitation. That single gesture rang louder than any parade I've ever attended, louder than any patriotic speech I ever bothered to sit through. And here I was with a lifetime of listening under my belt, and I'd missed it entirely. I judged. I assumed. I looked the other way. Now, when I'm walking down the sidewalk and I catch sight of someone who looks a little rough, I stop. When I hear a voice in the diner, low and strange, talking to no one I can see, I tune in. I don't always understand what I hear, but I try, because kindness isn't about having all the answers. It's about choosing to see someone as human even when they can't find the words, even when they sit in silence, especially then. So let me leave you with this. Think back on your day. Who did you pass by without a second thought? Who did you smirk at when maybe what they needed most was a seat and a warm look? Who did you label as a burden or a problem when maybe, just maybe, what they carried was a story no one had ever stopped long enough to hear? Sometimes the people doing the most good in this world don't wear medals or uniforms. Sometimes they wear aprons. Sometimes they serve coffee with steady hands and remind us, in small, wordless ways, what grace actually looks like. I hope I never forget what I witnessed that day. And more than that, I hope you don't miss your chance to see it for yourself. Thank you for sitting through this memory with me. It's not just a story about a corner booth in a diner. It's not just about a man who wore the weight of his years or a plate of hot food quietly set down in front of him. It's about the quiet strength of compassion and the way a single, unnoticed act can ripple out into something far bigger than itself. We move through life with blinders on, all of us. We assume, we categorize, we rush. But sometimes, if we're lucky, life hands us a moment so clear it breaks through the pain and demands we see, truly see, the people around us. So now I'll turn it over to you. Have you ever misjudged someone only to discover they were carrying more courage, more grief, more grace than you could have imagined? Have you ever looked at someone and failed to recognize the battle behind their eyes, the service they rendered quietly, the dignity they kept tucked under threadbare sleeves? If so, I'd love to hear your story. There's real strength in reflection, in connection. And if this story moved you even a little, I hope you will pass it along. Like it, share it. Let someone else know that decency hasn't gone out of style, that one person, without fanfare or approval, can still shift the world a little closer to kindness. We'll be back soon with more stories about quiet heroes, about honor where you least expect it, about hope that persists even in weary places. Until then, may we all carry a little more courage in our silence and a little more grace in how we see each other. May we all be a little more like Emily.